Today I want to talk about who the Tarnished is, who our player character in Elden Ring is going to be. From the trailer and some interviews with Miyazaki, we can begin to paint a picture of who we'll play as when we begin the game. It's kind of a mix in that it's still open to role-playing because the details are left out, but there are some kinds of motivations and context that are going to be informing who the Tarnished is and who we're playing as, regardless of what kind of specific backstory we give them. And I think the best way to do this is to first create a timeline of what has led up to the game, because that will be like the overarching backstory or context in a way of who our Tarnished is and who they're coming to the Lands Between as. So at first, the Lands Between were in a essentially pretty paradise Eden state. They were blessed by the Elden Ring, which was visually represented by the Erd Tree and the golden light that was filling everywhere and everyone. All had a golden light or aura shown in their eyes. In the trailer, we see something that I would interpret as this aura as the kind of golden light and color that we see emanate from our ring, our gauntlet, and also from some of the enemies as they're summoning weapons. This gold aura is a blessing or grace of the Erd Tree, which is probably by way of the Elden Ring, because the Erd Tree is kind of just the conduit or representation of the ring. And after some amount of time in the Lands Between, some lost this grace and their golden eyes, so just some subsection of the people there. These people who lost their grace and golden eyes were the Tarnished, and it should be noted that pure gold doesn't tarnish. So maybe these were beings that for some reason were different from everyone else even before they lost this grace. Maybe there's some reason they lost this grace that allows them to be tarnished. They weren't pure. And these people, the Tarnished, were banished, exiled, and sent out of the Lands Between. They were cast out of paradise in a biblical sort of way. Now, all of this occurred a long time before the game. The people that were exiled were tarnished, but they're not the Tarnished we play as. These were the ancestors of the player character and some others that we are going to find in the game. So who we play as, our ancestors were banished from the Lands Between and have lived in exile for a long time, probably going through many generations, because it seems very much like the player character was not originally in the Lands Between. So they were never there. Their people were once the Tarnished as a people group, but this specific Tarnished we play as has never been to the Lands Between. So it's coming home, it's coming back to where they were, but it's also a new place. And at least some of those who were in the Lands Between and weren't exiled looked and currently look down upon the Tarnished. And we see this in the tone that the many-armed prince character talks about us, the Tarnished, pretending as a lord.
A lowly Tarnished, playing as a lord.
So then, a long time after the Exodus, the Elden Ring is shattered, which we see happening in the teaser.
Shattered by someone or something.
Again, this is still before the game starts. The Shattering led to a war and the abandonment of the Greater Will, which we still don't have super clear ideas on what the Greater Will is. It's definitely something related to the Elden Ring. Maybe it's something that gave the Elden Ring its power or created the Elden Ring. It's pretty unsure. The Greater Will is one of the things we have the least details on. And this Shattering also led to a return of the grace which was lost by the exiled descendants. It calls out to them and beckons them to return to the Lands Between. So this lost grace, as we hear from the first female voice in the gameplay trailer, is beckoning the Tarnished to return, the descendant of those originally exiled. And this is where the game begins, with the Tarnished being called back by their previously lost grace. And this grace is also seemingly referred to as the Flame of Ambition, as that's like the motivating factor that is described in the gameplay trailer towards the Tarnished coming back to the Lands Between. And here I think a direct quote from Miyazaki is important. Quote, "One of the main themes of the game is how the player, the Tarnished, approaches or treats this newfound grace and this return to the land that they were once banished from. How they interpret this and its meaning." End quote. So is it redemption? Is it revenge? How does the Tarnished react to coming back to paradise, finding it ruined, and being spurned by those who failed to protect the paradise, the ring, and keep the peace? Does the Tarnished help or take power for themselves? To me, this reads as kind of leading to multiple endings. In Dark Souls 3, we saw a couple different endings somewhat like this, whether you relink the fire, or you let it go out, or you take power for yourself. So it seems like the Tarnished has a similar set of options. They can choose how they want to influence and help or hurt or ignore the world, the lands between, that they have historically been spurned from. Another thing that's kind of interesting to me is how the Tarnished is going to be dealing with this newfound grace, as Miyazaki puts it. This was a grace that was originally with the Tarnished's people, but the Tarnished themselves that we play as never had this grace, so it's a completely new phenomenon for them. Another thing that I think is key to point out is the use of the word grace and the connotations behind it when we talk about the Tarnished coming back to this broken land and deciding what to do. Part of the power that will allow them to do this is this lost grace, and grace is something that has strong biblical and religious connotations, which is something we see a lot in the trailer and the kind of setup, these kinds of religious orders and belief systems. So grace could imply a charitable and or benevolent tone to the Tarnished and to the power they're having. So that could skew us towards helping or restoring the land. And one last thing is that other characters are beckoned back to by this grace with their own motivations. The player character decides how they want to move forward with all of this, but the other characters, which are, I guess, other Tarnished, have their own motivations and interests as they return to this land that they were also exiled from. One more note from the trailer is that the female voice also says we have an unending curse under which we will continually die. So perhaps this beckoning lost grace is also a curse or contract that keeps the Tarnished from permanently dying, constantly restoring them and reviving them and making them respawn until they restore the Elden Ring and become an Elden Lord. Now this could be argued that it's just a reason for the gameplay, but in past FromSoft games, the whole idea of repeatedly dying and coming back to life and going hollow or not going hollow has been a very strong theme in the game in both the mechanics and the story. They've been very intertwined, some ludonarrative aspects going on, so I think it's safe to say that this will be some significant element in Elden Ring. So that's our timeline. We have a relatively straightforward set of events, even if we don't have a lot of detail on all of them. A takeaway for me is that it seems like the Tarnished is more directed than previous Soulsborne protagonists, and that's likely thanks to George R.R. Martin being very influential in the creation of the deep mythos, the background, and the setting for the story and the world of Elden Ring. A lot of this backstory and setup Miyazaki describes as George R.R. Martin being a very big part in creating that and helping inform this as the initial spurring moment of the player character. Previous games had this in some form, but it seems to have more of a narrative weight behind it in this iteration in Elden Ring. We have more explicit background about the Tarnished and what motivations could influence them, and that's going to create probably a more directed push from the Tarnished to enter this world and take their place in it. And even with that said, it's still very open-ended for role-playing and open-ended in terms of what the player does with the motivations, because the player could still be from a variety of lands outside of the lands between, and because they're a descendant, their life can be wholly their own, so role-playing can still be a completely vanilla, wide-open, paint-as-you-wish, blank canvas kind of experience, but it's more directed in having specific motivations and a context heading into the world of the lands between. So it's an interesting mix of open-ended and more directed, but I think it's a good change of pace while also keeping important aspects that made people enjoy the previous role-playing elements and contextualizations and setups that were enjoyed in the previous game. So that's my timeline and some reflections on who the Tarnished is. So they have more motivations, they're slightly more directed, they've been wronged in the past, or their people have been wronged in some way, and now they return to the broken paradise that they were once cast out of exile to find it destroyed, and it'll be up to them what they want to do inside this broken land, and what they want to do as they become an Elden Lord, whatever that means, and who they choose to brandish the Elden Ring for themselves, for the Tarnished, for everyone in the land between, for one section of the lands between, for a new people, a new world coming out of the lands between. To get a better idea on any of that, we're going to need more information, and as it comes out, I'll make more videos. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have any ideas about who the Tarnished is, or about the world and setting we find ourselves in as we enter the game, please feel free to leave it in the comments. And yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.